what? Peace and love to the family. Welcome yet again to the DarusCorbin Mystery School, the home of the esoteric and metaphysical knowledge. Peace and love to my elite enlightened ones. It's going to be a very, very amazing video. Amazing presentation. Thank y'all for the love. Continue to hit the like button. Continue to subscribe. Before I get started, of course, I want to say I do not own the copyrights to this amazing song by the brother Common and the brother Will I Am. I have a dream. Today, family, we will be putting a lot more respect on the legacy, the name that is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Once again, today, we will be putting a lot more respect on the name and the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. Civil rights leader, Baptist preacher. The brother has brought so many people together. Unity, preached a non-violent lifestyle. His inspiration was Gandhi. He was a son. He was a husband and a father. Today, we're going to put esoterically more respect on the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. Before I get started and go in, family, I want to first thank y'all once again for watching. You know, my biggest message is that we are greater. How do we realize that we are greater? By going within, by knowing that we are greater. By going within, by knowing who you are divinely, by not concentrating on the flesh, but going within the mind and knowing that Christ is within you. That has been the biggest secret that we have not learned. The biggest mystery that we have not solved until now. In the age of Pisces, they dictated and they ruled with religion. In the age of Aquarius, we will now regain our thrones with wisdom, divine wisdom. So, family, make sure you got a pen, make sure you got a pad, something to write down with. Because this is going to be an interesting presentation today. You see the title, Dr. Martin Luther King and Mithra. For those who have never heard of Mithra, let me see a show of hands. Don't worry, I can see you. You're going to find out who Mithra was. We're going to find out how spiritually in tune Dr. Martin Luther King really was. I said we're going to find out how spiritually enlightened Dr. Martin Luther King really was. And at the same time today, we're going to put respect on his name and respect on who you are divinely as a spirit. Especially once you understand that God is within you. God recognizes himself through you. You recognize yourself through God. This is how we work this. You guys ready to go in? Thank you so much. Hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. We are family. You are the elite enlightened one. Class is now in session. This brother right here, just in case you guys may not know who I'm talking about. This legend, this leader, Dr. Martin Luther King. He left us, I believe, in 1968, assassinated April of 1968. I'm pretty sure. Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, was a Baptist minister who became best known as a civil rights activist decades ago. Now make sure you listen to that part. For those who are familiar, because a lot of you watching, you were around in the times that Dr. Martin Luther King, was alive. You understand the movement. You understand the leadership, the sacrifice that this man made because you was right there to witness it. A lot of us, like myself, we just learned in school. I had this dream one time that I was in a church. It's a true story. I was a very young child. That I was in church, in the back of a church. Now, up front near the pulpit area was no other than Dr. Martin Luther King himself, and he was with some other gentlemen, and they were discussing whatever they were discussing. And I just remember in this dream, of course, as I'm sitting in the back and I'm watching these men conversate, the feeling and how real it was just to be in the presence of this man, knowing even in the dream that this was a important moment that I was witnessing right now. I couldn't interact with him at all, but it was just like watching a hologram. It was just really being in the experience of it. Everything felt real, but just knowing that I was in a dream was amazing. Just wanted to share that with y'all right quick. For those who do dream a lot like I dream and enter the astral world, and those dreams are so real, so familiar that you know a lot of times you've been there before and experienced that. So just wanted to share that with you. Dr. Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister who became best known as a civil rights activist decades ago. Listen up. He wrote about many things, including Mithraism. Now, this is where the pen and paper is important because class is in session right now. Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister, a lot of us know that already, who became best known as a civil rights activist decades ago. He wrote about many things, including Mithraism. You got your pen ready? Mithraism. Mithraism. Mithraism was a religion that observed Sunday and had followers such as the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. By a show of hands, how many of you heard of Constantine? For my religious and my theologians out there, my scholars, I know you know who Constantine are. People in the congregation of these churches, have you heard of the Emperor Constantine from the 4th century? And if you haven't, please do your research because Constantine, the emperor that is, played a major influence of Christianity being the biggest and most influential religion. He put that religion into law. Before he did that, Christianity was like the bottom of the barrel, and there are people with him. He was peer pressured. Constantine was damn near peer pressure into converting into Christianity himself. He became a Christian through peer pressure. And within doing that, he made Christianity the biggest and only religion in the 4th century. Do your research on him. Of course, some of you guys know about the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. You know about Constantine, right? But do you know about Arius? Write down this name, Arius, Arius. Arius knew that Jesus was not the Father, that he was just a man that was dwelled in the spirit. But what Constantine put down the throats of all the world leaders at that time was a total opposite. So a lot of you know about Constantine, but make sure you know about Arius as well. Once again, Arius. He was the only voice that really spoke out on what true Christianity mean, and his voice was silenced in the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Once again, that's Arius, Arius. Let's continue. Dr. Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister. I want to keep saying this so you can understand how deep this goes and how much we think we know of Dr. Martin Luther King. And we're going to find out how less we knew. The spiritual, divine Dr. Martin Luther King, what he was taught and what he was learned. Martin Luther King was a Baptist minister who became best known as a civil rights activist decades ago. He wrote about many things, including Mithraism. And once again, family, that is spelled Mithraism. Mithraism was a religion that observed Sunday and had followers such as the Roman Emperor Constantine in the 4th century. Listen up. Here are some of what Martin Luther King Jr. wrote about in a paper dated in November 23rd, 1949. Shout out to all my people out there from the 40s, 50s, and 60s and on. The OGs, our respected elders. Peace and salute to all my elders. Thank you for paving the way. I know what it is and I respect what it is. So, family, what we're about to witness and observe are some letters and notes that Dr. Martin Luther King wrote when he was in college. I want you to listen closely to what Dr. Martin Luther King says in these notes. A lot of us didn't know this. You know this now. Here is some of what Martin Luther King Jr. wrote about in a paper dated November 23rd, 1949. And he goes on to say, Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. King, I'm going to just shorten it up now. Dr. King says this, and I quote, "In Avesta, Avesta, he says, in Avesta, Mithra was the genius of celestial light. The doctrine of the immortality of the soul was another view which was very prominent in Mithraism. Women were compelled to seek salvation in some other cult, for Mithraism excluded them entirely." Dr. King goes on and says, "When Mithraism is compared to Christianity, there are surprisingly many points of similarity of all the mystery cults. Mithraism was the greatest competitor of Christianity." I want y'all to take the time to absorb that part in for a little bit. Dr. King, the civil rights leader, the Baptist preacher, the Christian. In 1949, this is what he wrote. I want you to let that sink in. He left us and transcended in 1968, I believe. A lot of what we knew publicly about Dr. King was everything that they just continued to feed us. We didn't know, a lot of us didn't know, that he actually sat down with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. I do believe the Honorable Louis Farrakhan was in that room when that happened. He had meetings, shook the hand of Malcolm X, Brother Shabazz. Today, you're going to really know how spiritually woke Dr. King was. Because, you know, we always use the word woke. Dr. King was woke woke. We're gonna see today if you was Dr. King woke. Because like my brother Red Pill said, and shout out to the pillars, you can be woke, but you still gotta get out of bed and do the work. You can be woke, but you still gotta get out of bed and do the work. I'm gonna read that again quickly. Dr. King said in 1949, while he was in college, his notes, his presentation, his lectures. In Avesta, Dr. King says, Mithra was the genius of celestial light. The doctrine of the immortality of the soul was another view which was very prominent in Mithraism. Women were compelled to seek salvation in some other cult, for Mithraism excluded them entirely. When Mithraism is compared to Christianity, there are surprisingly many points of similarity. Of all the mystery cults, Mithraism was the greatest competitor of Christianity. Let's say that again. Of all the mystery cults, Mithraism was the greatest competitor of Christianity. That Christians did copy and borrow from Mithraism cannot be denied, is what Dr. King says. Here are some of his writings dated now, February 15, 1950. Now we just left some of his notes that he gave us and he wrote in 1949. This is what he says in his notes and his writings dated February 15, 1950, Dr. King says Mithraism was suppressed by the Christians sometime in the later part of the 4th century AD, but it collapsed seems to have been due to the fact that by that time many of its doctrines has been adopted by the church so that it was practically absorbed by its rival. I'm going to say that again. Dr. King wrote, Mithraism was suppressed, held back. Listen, Mithraism was suppressed by the Christians sometime in the later part of the 4th century. What century was said about Constantine? 4th. Mithraism was suppressed by the Christians sometime in the later part of the 4th century AD, but it collapsed seems to have been due to the fact that by that time many of its doctrines had been adopted by the church so that it was practically absorbed by its rivals. Now, to my people out there, my theologians, my scholars, my religious people, those who are not in either of those fields, we know we are privileged to the fact that there have been tribes, ancients, people with spiritual beliefs who have been murdered, persecuted, burnt. Pagans, paganism is what I'm talking about. And beyond, I'm talking about we have tribes, we have had tribes, ancient ancestors, paganism. These people have been burned, persecuted, just to have the people who murdered them, who burnt them alive, who persecute them, take their beliefs, take their shit, and use it for their own. Same beliefs. And that's what Christianity did. That's what Dr. King knew. Did you know that? These ancient tribes, these people are elders. This goes all the way back to the cosmos. These Greeks, these Romans discovered stuff from the tribes. And what the tribes do, outcasted these people because of it, killed them, burnt them alive on stakes, just to absorb, to take, to steal, to use, to borrow the same ones that they killed beliefs. Can you let that sink in? Let's go back to some more Dr. King. I'm going to read that one more time so it can get inside of your head. I'm not speaking to the flesh. I'm speaking to your soul. This whole presentation is going to reach to your soul because not only today am I putting more respect and we're putting more respect on the legacy of Dr. King, but we are now in real time, as I always do on the Mystery School, is letting you know that you are greater. How am I letting you know that you are greater, you ask? By through the Christ energy, by the divine internal, that inner work that you must do. That's how you found out that you are Christ. That's how you found out that you are God. And by being God, you have to appreciate the God inside you. That's how God operates. It's a one-on-one love. With that one-on-one love, you discover the one, and you discover that you are the one. Let's go back. Mithraism was suppressed by the Christians sometime in the later part of the 4th century AD, but its collapse seems to have been due to the fact that by that time, many of its doctrines had been adopted by the church, so that it was practically absorbed by its rival. Dr. King continues on to write, the church made a sacred day out of Sunday, particularly because of the resurrection. But when we observe a little further, we find that as a solar festival, Sunday was the sacred day of Mithra. I like that term too, solar festival. Hey, Somebody set up a solar festival. Let's get a solar festival started. I like the name of that. I like the sound of that. Let's get a solar festival when we all unite, unified consciousness. We give thanks to our elders, to ourselves. Solar festival. Let's do that. Let's read that again. The church made a sacred day out of Sunday, particularly because of the resurrection. But when we go back a little further, we find that as a solar festival, Sunday was the sacred day of Mithra. It is also interesting to notice that since Mithra was addressed, it is also interesting to notice that since Mithra was addressed as Lord Sunday, excuse me, let me read that again slowly. It is also interesting to notice that since Mithra was addressed as Lord, Sunday must have been the Lord's day. It is also interesting to notice that since Mithra was addressed as Lord, Sunday must have been the Lord's day, long before Christian use, and this is what Dr. King is writing in 1950. It is also to be noticed that our Christmas, December 25th, was the birthday of Mithra, and was only taken over in the 4th century as the date actually known of the birth of Jesus. Now, for those who have watched my video for going on 3 years now, you know one of my biggest themes is saying it is useless, it is pointless, and it is detrimental to your soul when you look out only one window and you view out only one window where you're in a mansion, a big house with so many different views and windows and understanding and wisdom and knowledge, all of it, understanding, and only judge from that window. And for a lot of people in religion, mainstream religion, especially my Christian family who I love so much, that's what we have been doing. That's what you have been doing for so many centuries. Excuse me. You have been basing your life, your soul, your well-being on basically 4 gospels, the canonical gospels, and not knowing the inner work that people like Paul, St. Paul knew. And in a later day, I'm going to go a little deeper on St. Paul because he had the esoteric teachings of it. A lot of Christianity really started from what St. Paul knew. Well, let's go on. I'm going to read that again. The church made a sacred day out of Sunday, particularly because of the resurrection. But when we observe a little further, we find that as a solar festival, Sunday was the sacred day of Mithra. Once again, Mithra is spelled Mithra. It is also interesting to notice that since Mithra was addressed as Lord, Sunday must have been, and I quote, the Lord's day, long before Christian use. And this is once again Dr. Martin Luther King, writing this in 1950. It is also to be noticed that our Christmas, December 25th, was the birthday of Mithra and was only taken over in the 4th century as the date actually unknown of the birth of Jesus. Emperor Constantine, the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD. A lot of stuff was put in effect in that day, in that meeting. These were some of them. To make the picture a little more clear, Dr. King says, we may list a few of the similarities between these 2 religions. Number 1, both regard Sunday as a holy day. Number 2, December 25th came to be considered as the anniversary of the birth of Mithra and Christ. Also, baptism and a ritual meal were important parts of both groups, says Dr. Martin Luther King, the civil rights leader and Baptist preacher. In summary, Dr. King says, we may say that the belief in mortality, a mediator between God and man, the observance of certain sacramental rites were common to Mithraism and Christianity. And the person of this website, the author of this website says, and that ends what I just said. That ends Martha King is writing on this page, but we're about to go in more. Trust and believe that. But the author of this website says, notice that Martha King clearly understood that Sunday churches dropped the Sabbath, that the Lord's Day essentially first meant the day of Mithra, and that the world's churches did adopt many practices from Mithraism. Much of what now is called Christianity, quote, end quote, is a compromise with the religion of Mithraism. And he goes on to say, I wish that Martin King Jr. and others would have emphasized this aspect of his writings more. I would also add that Christians faithful to the original teachings of Christ, the apostles, and the New Testament did not adapt the practices of Mithraism. While Dr. King was most known for his civil rights protests, he figured out that much of what passed for Christianity in his day was really a form that adopted Mithraistic practices. Does that include your version? And this how it ends. And the creator of that website said that he wished that Dr. King and others went more. Now, I can't speak for Dr. King, but Dr. King was on a mission of his own. Obviously, he knew this much about Christianity and ancient pagan religions and beliefs, I might well say, that would have, once Dr. King really got in position, he was already shaking hands with Malcolm X. He was already having sit downs with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the great Honorable Louis Farrakhan. Imagine if he got everything lined up the way he wanted to. If these brothers got it all together as a unity and line it up and really have the people woke and using their magical, spiritual, divine powers. Imagine. It would be no different than Tupac and Biggie squashing all that petty stuff, squashing all that stuff, not getting the tabloids and the magazines, people to really stir it up. And the people that was really around them two brothers really just was on some unified, let's get this money, man, let's unify the people type of vibes. Similarity to that, if that would happen. So I'm leaving that page, and I hope as I go into the next page that I am awakening the conscious, the subconscious. I'm speaking to the soul. Because this is what this channel is about, the Mystery School. I want you to know how deep this brother Dr. King was, and I want you to do your research on Mithra and Mithraism. Let's go on. I got some more stuff for you. We're going to read another presentation that Martin Luther King did, and you can look this up on Google. A study on Mithraism. So if you want to go further into this research after this presentation, I'm reading it, but of course you can get the visual for yourself, and you can see what his brother was writing about. This is once again dated September 13, 1949. This is some of Dr. King's writings. Before I go in on his writings, I'm going to read the details. And it says, during the first, this is not Dr. King yet, this is just the details before we get to Dr. King's writings on the study of Mithraism, done in 1949. The details say, during the first semester of his second year at Crozer, that's Crozer, Dr. King wrote this paper for Insulin's course on Greek religion. Mithraism, a set of Zoroastrianism, and that's spelled Zoroastrianism, characterized by the worship of Mithra as the defender of the truth, was a monotheistic mystery religion prevalent in the Roman Empire before the acceptance of Christianity in the 4th century. Followers of Mithra became less common after the Roman emperors banned their cults, and Christianity gained the popularity that once belonged to Mithraism. Insulin, spelled Ensin, gave the essay an A and wrote, and I quote, "This is an exceedingly good paper." This is what Dr. King's teacher said to Dr. King after he wrote it. Because the teacher, it was so good, the teacher gave him an A. Like, damn. He went deep on this presentation, on his writings, on the study of Mithraism. That's what Dr. King's teacher said. Ensling gave the essay an A and wrote, and I quote, listen to this. This is what his teacher said. "This is an exceedingly good paper. You have given a very complete picture of the essential details, and you have presented this in a balanced and restrained way. And furthermore, you know how to write. You should go a long way if you continue to pay the price." Bars. That's what Dr. King's teacher wrote to him in response to this presentation that Dr. King did in 1949 when he was in college at Crosser. Did you know that? See, a lot of people not reading, they say, "Oh, I don't read this, that, and the third." And I can't judge. I don't judge. But there's nothing wrong with reading and knowing more. Because if you don't know this about Dr. King, how can you really put respect on this man and who he was spiritually, divinely? Not just what you've seen on the public and on the TV, but who he was spiritually. To truly know somebody, you just know their spirituality and what they believe. His teacher said this. Once again, listen to what the teacher said after he gave him that A. "This is an exceedingly good paper. You have given a very complete picture of the essential details, and you have presented this in a balanced and restrained way. And furthermore, you know how to write. You should go a long way if you continue to pay the price." Now, let me ask you that, my elite light ones. Class, let me ask you this. Do you think Dr. King paid the price? His teacher said you should go a long way if you continue to pay the price. You think Dr. King paid the price? Think he got the receipts? Yeah, somebody definitely got the receipts. Okay. And now we're about to go into some of his writings. And like I said, you can, some more of his writings. Depending on how long it is, I might read the whole thing. I probably won't. But I'm going to read some of it so you can get to the mind of Dr. King a little bit more. So bear with me, and I'm going to be reading some of this. Like I said, you can Google Dr. Martin Luther King and the study of Mithraism and look at his works from 1949. You can reread the works I did just a while ago on that he did in 1950, and really see how much this brother knew. Here we go. Dr. King writes, The Greco-Roman world in which the early church developed was one of diverse religions. The conditions of that era made it possible for these religions to sweep like a tidal wave over the ancient world. And before I continue to read, I want you to get in your head, get in your mind, get in your soul that this is Dr. Martin Luther King, the civil rights leader, the Baptist preacher, who is writing this in 1949. We're putting more respect on his name so we can get a better understanding who he was spiritually. This is what we're doing in real time. The Greco-Roman world in which the early church developed was one of diverse religions, Dr. King says. The conditions of that era made it possible for these religions to sweep like a tidal wave over the ancient world. Let me read that again. The Greco-Roman world in which the early church developed was one of diverse religions. The conditions of that era made it possible for these religions to sweep like a tidal wave over the ancient world. These conditions made it possible for the churches to knock everything and every belief and every spirituality that the ancient ones knew, is what he is saying. Oh, Dr. King is about to get this brother started as well. Because he's in the building right now. We in spirit right now. The people of that age were eager and zealous in their search for religious experience. That was the drug, that was the high, to feel this religious experience back then. The existence of this atmosphere was vitally important in the development and eventual triumph of Christianity. Dr. King goes on and says, these many religions were not alike in every respect. To draw this conclusion would lead to a gracious and erroneous supposition. But it is to be noticed that they possess many fundamental likenesses. The first one, they all held that the initiate shared in symbolic, sacramental fashion the experiences of the God. Let me read that again. These many religions were not alike in every respect. To draw this conclusion will lead to a gracious and erroneous supposition. So to lead to that assumption will lead in error. You'll be thinking wrong. But it is to be noticed that they possess many fundamental likenesses. The first one, they all held that the initiate shared in symbolic, sacramental fashion the experiences of the God. All had secret rites for the initiated. All offered mystical cleansing from sin. Number 4, all promised a happy future for the faithful. It is not at all surprising in view of the wide and growing influence of these religions that when the disciples in Antioch and elsewhere preached a crucified and risen Jesus, they should be regarded as the heralds of another mystery religion, and that Jesus himself should be taken for the divine Lord of the cult through whose death and resurrection salvation was to be had. It is at this point that we are able to see why knowledge of these cults is important for any serious New Testament study. It is well nigh impossible to grasp Christianity through and through without knowledge of these cults. Listen to what Dr. King said, family. I thank you for your patience. I thank you for listening. Share this with your family. Share this with your scholars and theologians. And share this with your class. Dr. King says in 1949, as we continue on, it is at this point that we are able to see why knowledge of these cults is important for any serious New Testament study. It is well nigh impossible to grasp Christianity through and through without knowledge of these cults. And I'm so glad Dr. King said that, because what he's saying in hindsight is, to my Christian theologians who stay uptight and never want to believe nothing else and never want to take in fact that their Christianity goes way deeper than what you've been taught, he is saying that it is impossible for you to take Christianity as a whole seriously without studying the ancient cults and the ones that Christianity took from. Because once you understand these cults, then you will understand your Christianity a lot more, is what he is saying. That there were striking similarities between the developing church and these religions cannot be denied. Let me read that in its entirety. It is well nigh impossible to grasp Christianity through and through without knowledge of these cults, Dr. King says. That there were striking similarities between the developing church and these religions cannot be denied. Even Christian apologists had to admit that fact. For an instant in the mystery religions, identification between the devotee and the lord of the cult was supposed to be brought about by various rites of initiation. The Tarabolum, and that's spelled Taurobolum, the Tarabolum, or bath of blood, the eating of flesh of the sacrificial beast, and the like. Now there was something of this in Paul too, for he thought of this believer as buried with Christ in baptism, and as fitting upon him in the Eucharist. This is only one of many examples that I could give to prove the similarity between the developing Christian church and mystery religions. Dr. King says. And one thing, I don't know if I said this earlier, but one thing I want my Christian scholars, my religious people to do seriously. I want you to take a more esoteric look at St. Paul. Of course, for those who know, St. Paul was one who first persecuted Christians. St. Paul was one who at first persecuted, killed Christians. Then he converted to Christianity. But they don't talk about how and why. That's because St. Paul discovered the esoteric teachings of Christianity. What are you saying, Corbin? St. Paul, who all true theologians and scholars and preachers and Baptists and Reverend know that most of Christianity's work come from St. Paul and St. Paul's work. They don't know that he knew esoterically about who Christ was, the true spirit of Christ, the importance of the Christ energy, the importance of the divine wisdom, which is the Mother Sophia. See, he knew that. You didn't know that. They didn't teach us that in church. But that's why you didn't know that Paul was playing both sides of the fence back in those days. Paul knew the true teachings of the Christ and the Christ energy and who Sophia the wisdom was. But because popularity was still mainstream and it just was new and Constantine was just going in for peer pressure of Christianity, he was playing both sides. And do understand that esoteric, esoteric, esoteric means the hidden knowledge. So when Jesus the Christ was teaching to his disciples, he was speaking in esoteric. That means only for them to know the inner work, the esoteric, the sacred knowledge that you must be initiated to know. Because Christ Jesus, because he knew that the masses would not get it right away and they will understand the deeper and inner meanings, he spoke to them in exoteric knowledge. That means the knowledge that is meant for the masses, for the public. And until you, my Christian scholars, my theologians, my religious people in general, until you understand the two, esoteric, esoteric, and then exoteric, exoteric, the first one being the hidden knowledge, the second one being the one for the masses, until you understand these two, you will never understand the fact that you have been withheld and suppressed for who you are divinely as a soul. Because if you focus on Christianity as a flesh being, you will never get your blessing and never understand who God is. Frankie Beverly and Mays once says, "We are one. No matter what we do, we are one." Until you understand that, my beautiful people, you will never understand the God, the power of God, and the one creator. Never. That's why we are here. Now there was something of this in Paul too, for he thought of this believer as buried with Christ in baptism and as fitting upon him on the Eucharist. This is only one of many examples that I could give to prove this similarity between the developing Christian church and the mystery religions, writes Dr. Martin Luther King in 1949. This is not to say that a St. Paul or a St. John sat down and copied these views verbatim, but after being in contact with these surrounding religions and hearing certain doctrines expressed, it was only natural for some of these views to become a part of their subconscious. I better put some respect on Dr. King's legacy. Share this video. A lot of people ain't knowing about what he said. Share this video. My melanated people, my people of all colors, share this video. Dr. King says, this is not to say that a St. Paul or St. John sat down and copied these views verbatim, but after being in contact with these surrounding religions and hearing certain doctrines expressed, it was only natural for some of these views to become part of their subconscious. You grew up your whole life watching Power Rangers, Street Fighter, Spider-Man. There's going to be a certain part of you that feels that energy, feel that you can be Superman. Spider-Man, Batman. You know, a lot of us watch Batman. We're like, wow, he don't have any superpowers. He had the means by money, financial means, to become a superhero, a vigilante. I can do that. So it's not to say that they copied Batman, but they were so inspired by Batman that subconsciously they knew they could become Batman. Is that what Martin Luther King said, that people like Paul and St. John did it, but it goes a lot deeper than that. But let's continue to go on. But after being in contact with these surrounding religions and hearing certain doctrines expressed, it was only natural for some of these views to become part of their subconscious minds. When they sat down to write, they were expressing consciously that which had dwelled in their subconscious minds. It is also significant to know that Roman tolerance had favored this great synchronism of religious ideas. Borrowing was not only natural but inevitable. Inevitable. One of the most interesting of these ancient cults, Dr. King says, was Mithraism. Once again, that's Mithraism, which bore so many points of resemblance to Christianity that it is a challenge to the modern student to investigate these likenesses and learn more about them. I'm going to keep saying it, to my scholars, my religious scholars, my theologians, to people who think they know what they know and are in the know. If you were just only preaching from, if you were only talking and preaching from Orthodox religion, Orthodox Christianity, then you cannot expect to know and get the whole pie of what you truly are as a person, spirit and flesh. You're never going to understand the Holy Spirit. That means the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, which is actually the Divine Mother. Woo! Are you ready for that? The wisdom that is in your Bible is the Divine Mother, the dove. Until you go past Orthodox religion, you don't know nothing about who you are as a soul. One of the most interesting of these ancient cults was Mithraism, which bore so many points of resemblance to Christianity that is a challenge to modern student to investigate these likenesses and learn more about them. Mithraism is perhaps the greatest example of paganism's last effort to reconcile itself to the great spiritual movement which was gaining such sturdy influence with its pure conception of God. He goes on to say, Ernest Renan, the French philosopher and Orientalist, expressed the opinion that Mithraism would have been the religion of the modern world if anything had occurred to halt or destroy the growth of Christianity. The French philosopher Ernest Renan, and that's Renan, Dr. King says, expressed the opinion that Mithraism would have been the religion of the modern world if anything had occurred to halt, that means stop, or destroy the growth of Christianity in the early centuries of its existence. All this goes to show how important Mithraism was in ancient times. Christians, how that make you feel? You wouldn't be Christians, you would be Mithraism followers. The present study represents an attempt to provide a survey of the general character of the Mithric religion, says Dr. King. The main source of reference for this study was the magnificent work of Cumont, and that's spelled C-U, or Cumont, spelled C-U-M-O-N-T. In order to give a comprehensive picture of this mystery cult, I will discuss 4 points. Dr. King discussed these points. Number 1, the origin and dissemination, dissemination of Mithraism. Number 2, the doctrines of Mithraism. Number 3, the liturgy of Mithraism. And number 4, the influence of Mithraism on Christianity. And he starts with the origin and dissemination of Mithraism. And like I said, I'm probably going to stop at an hour. But I want you guys, before I continue reading, to know that this is, once again, the work, and to a certain degree, the unknown work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights leader, the Baptist preacher. His work in 1949 when he was going at Krosner University to college. In 1949. I read to you what his teacher said. Of course, I just want to put a lot more respect on Dr. King's name on this video. I want you to share this information. I want you to sit back and understand that within me doing this presentation, I just also want you to show that you are greater. Through this presentation, Dr. King is telling you that you are greater. How? He's letting you know that Christianity, what you hold dear to all more Orthodox Christians, that there was more to it. And in order for you to find out how much more there was to it, you would have to go to these pagans, these esoteric, these Gnostic teachings to understand who Christ, who Jesus really was, and what the Christ really was. Because the same thing that John and Jesus did in the New Testament, Elijah and Elisha did in the Old Testament. The same thing I was telling you, and I'm telling you that Simon Kimbangu and Simon Tokyo did in Africa in the late 1800s going through the 1960s. You have to know that you are greater spiritually. I don't believe in what they call mental health. Because so much has been hidden from you, my beautiful people. So much has been deprived from you. So much has been suppressed from you that wouldn't you be a little mental? If you didn't know that you were really a divine spiritual and all you have to do is control your mind because your mind is a connection with God, and how you control those thoughts and how you maneuver through your life, controlling your thoughts and knowing that you are greater and more pure because you have the seed, the divine spark in you. If you knew that and going through high vibrations and stop thinking negative about your stuff and stop letting people influence you with negativity. If we do this, we will be greater. So for my Christians, I encourage you to study your early parents as far as Christianity, which are the Gnostics, Gnostic. See what they say about Christ, Jesus. See what they say about the God in your Bible. Get introduced to the God in your Bible's mother, Sophia, the wisdom. To my Islam brothers, major respect to my Islamic brothers. For those who just only study in Orthodox religion of Islam, I encourage you to discover the Sufis, the great mystic Sufis, S-U-F-I, Inshallah, Medu Bala, Ish Allah, Medu Allah. Respect. I'm going to finish it here, and I encourage you guys to study this. Hit the like button, subscribe, tell a friend and tell a friend and tell a friend about the mystery school. We're in the age of Aquarius. It's time to wake up. Let's go. The history of Mithraism, Dr. King, once again, this is Dr. King writing in 1949. Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. King says, the history of Mithraism lies deep in the roots of the past. Documents which belong to the 14th century before Christ have been found in the Hittite capital of Bogaz, that's spelled Boghaz, Q, and that's spelled Keui, in which the names of Mithra, Vanna, Idra, and the heavenly twins are recorded. Let me read that again. Martin, Dr. King is spitting right now. I want to make sure I'm reading this right because he's spitting bars, facts. Listen to him. The history of Mithraism, Dr. King says, lies deep in the roots of the past. Documents which belong to the 14th century before Christ have been found in the Hittite capital of Bogaz, which is spelled Boghaz, Bogaz Q, or Keu, which is Keui, in which the names of Mithra, Vana, which is spelled Vanuna, Indra, which is spelled Indra, and the heavenly twins are recorded. It is also known that they were written long before the separation of the Indian race and Iranian races. Dr. King he's spitting right now, guys. He's giving us history facts. It is also known what they it is also known that they were written long before the separation of the Indian and Iranian races. But to give the exact origin of this cult and to determine exactly where Mithra came from would be merely conjecture. Many have held the opinion that Mithra came originally from the high plateaus of the Hindu Kush, and the differences in his nature when he is found later in India and Iran were due to environmental influences in the two distinctly different areas. In the Vedas, and I want to say this before I go. I know a lot of us we're doctrine on the Bible and on the Quran, and major respect to the Bible and the Quran is what it is. But if you haven't read the Torah, the Talmud, the Zohar, and the Vedas in Hindu, the Vedas are older than any scripture written down. The Vedas are what Jesus was learning from. When Jesus or Yeshua or Saint Issa, as he was known as in Hindu, when he was being taught the Vedas, Vedas, the Hindu scriptures, which are oldest of old. Check them out. Let's continue going in right quick. I ain't got too much time. I want y'all to read this on your own. In the Vedas, he was associated with Vanaru and was invoked together with him as a light god. Oh, let me go. Let me read again. Many have held the opinion that Mithra came originally from the high plateaus of the Hindu Kush, and the differences in his nature when he is found later in India and Iran were due to environmental influences in the two distinctly different areas. In the Vedas, he was associated with the Varuna and was invoked together with him as a light god. The Iranians, however, placed Mithra in the position of archangel, in position of an archangel. In the position of archangel, it says once again, although Ara Mazda was the supreme god and family, you need to know these ancient names for these ancient energies way before Christianity came. Ara Mazda, and that's spelled Ahura Mazda. I'm making a challenge right now to everybody who's watching this video right now. And if you're a scholar or a person who loves to do research and learn higher gnosis, which is knowledge, I challenge you to research Ara Mazda, and that's spelled Ahura Mazda. And hit me up on the comment section. Hit me up on Instagram. It's DarusCorbin, same name. Hit me up on Facebook and let me know what you have discovered about Ara Mazda. My teacher, Dr. Deborah Blair, used to always say, there is no truth until you decide what truth is. I'm giving you these facts, but it's up to you to, after you push that, after the stop button is done, after you're done watching this, then do your research. This is what I'm encouraging you to do. Although Ara Mazda was the supreme god, he created Mithra equal to himself and made him chief among the Yasatas. That's spelled Yazatas. Evidence of his exalted position lies in the fact that the longest Yast, and that's spelled Yasht, 8 times longer than that in honor of Ara Mazda, is dedicated to Mithra. He possessed many attributes, the most important being his office of defender of truth and all good things, in the Avesta. This is the sacred book of the religion of Iran. Mithra is represented as the genius of celestial light. He emerges from the rocky summits of eastern mountains at dawn and goes to heaven with a team of 4 white horses. When the night falls, he still illuminizes the surface of the earth, and I quote, ever walking, ever watchful. He is not the sun or moon or any star, but a spirit of light, ever wakeful, watching with 100 eyes. He hears all and sees all. None can deceive him. Mithra was the god of wide pastures and the pastures, and the giver of gifts. Mithra was the god of wide pastures, Pastures, and the giver of gifts. He was worthy of sacrifice and worship and desired the respect and prayer. Let me read that again. He was and the giver of gifts. December 25th was his birthday. We're thinking of Santa. Okay, let's go on. He was worthy of sacrifice and worship and desired the respect and prayer of the faithful, on whom he bestowed bounteous gifts. December 25th, he was born. Think of Christmas. Do you see how it all was plagiarized and borrowed, right? On the other hand, he was a warrior of violent and bitter nature. The forces of evil were his enemies, and he joined with Sharashah, and that's spelled Sraosh, which means obedience, and Rashnu, which is spelled Rashnu, justice. So he joined with obedience and justice in opposing them. The fame of Mithra spread as the Persian Empire expanded, and he became particularly strong in Asia Minor. Many other Persian kings, Dr. King writes, grew very fond of Mithra and sponsored worship of him. It was during this time that the worship of Mithra developed into an independent religion. It is interesting to note that as Mithraism was spreading through the Persian through the Persian Empire, it was constantly borrowing ideas from other cultures. When it came in contact with Semitic star worship, it assimilated much of it as well as some of the mythology of ancient Babylonian. Also, the cult incorporated many local practices and ideas from Asia Minor. Finally, it was influenced to a certain extent by Hellenistic culture. After having consolidated its theology and drawing into this rank Semini converts in Asia Minor and Persia, Mithraism had almost reached its climax. It was, however, the latest religion of its kind to become popular in the Roman Empire. Mithraism was not popular in the Roman Empire until AD 100. And I'm going to end this way. The greatest, Dr. King writes, the greatest agency of propagation of Mithraism was the army. Under the Roman policy of conscription, troops from conquered lands were sent to serve in other parts of the empire. Among the forces which was drawn up in that fashion were soldiers from such places as Cappadocia, Commagene, Potnus, and Armenia, where Mithraism was extremely popular. When these men were sent out to foreign outposts to serve in the Roman army, they did not forget their religious customs. Converts were quickly gained with the army. Evidence of this diffusion of Mithraism by the army has been found in Scotland, Africa, Spain, Germany, and almost every locality where Roman troops were sent. A second means of spreading Mithraism in the empire was through slaves who were sent to Italy from Asia Minor. Many of these slaves became public servants in the great bureaus of the government. It was these slaves who were missionaries for Mithra in Italy and who practiced his mysteries in the very heart of the Roman world. There was a third group which spread the Mythic religion. This group consisted of Syrian merchants who established trading posts throughout the empire. Kuban is of this opinion that most of these Syrians belonged to the upper classes and were not the true worshippers of Mithra. He argues that it was the slaves and servants of these merchants who were followers of Mithra, and they introduced the religion to the inhabitants of maritime towns where their masters engaged in. The great expansion of Mithraism in the ancient world can be traced to these three sources in almost every case. The slaves were forever looking for a better day, and they believed that through worshiping Mithra that day would eventually come. And for the soldiers, they found Mithraism very appealing because it offered them the protection of a deity who they believed would help them to be victorious in combat. After seeing these facts, it is very easy to understand why these worshippers were so zealous in spreading their religion. It was a part of their total makeup. To argue that many were drawn into this cult through curiosity alone is certainly an unwarranted assumption. To be sure, the initiatory rites, as we will see later in this paper, were so strenuous that only the sincere and earnest converts would have wished to take part in them. And I'm going to stop there, my beautiful people. I want to thank you once again for tuning into the DarusCorbin Mystery School. Hit the like button. Subscribe. If you really want to show love, family, hit the Cash App. I appreciate all y'all love. $ DarusCorbin. Every bit's help, I appreciate it. If not, I thank you for the likes and I thank you for the subscribes anyway. This is class. Class is in session. Continue to be enlightened. Continue to know that you are greater. Don't forget, share this video. Let people know that Dr. King was a lot more spiritual than they put out in the masses. Understand that you are greater once you know who you are. Peace and love to the family. I'm out.